Scribble notes when I wrote these quotes. If I offend, pardon me, there's more of me to grow. Creative in my process, enjoy the show. The will is different when you recognize the different strokes. Different folks, same goals, we all want the most. So when we reach the top, we can enjoy the toast. The type of bread we get is fresh about the bakery. Told them don't play with me, with or without a degree. Don't question my intensity, bravery. Similar to agencies that want to see you fold. So just pray for me. Pray for me. Einstein with my energy.
Welcome to the Scribble Notes podcast. How are you living? How are you doing? It's been a while.
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on. I gotta say, and I don't say this because I'm here now or just because I'm with you, but the episode of the Walk Show podcast that you came on came out a few weeks ago. Just one of my favorite episodes that I've had in a long time. And I don't mean to diminish my other guests that I've had with saying that, but when I've had people ask me, hey, what episode, if I was going to check out your show, what episode would I check out? That's been the one I've recommended now, which I've got over 150 episodes. So
thank you.
Yeah, you're awesome, man. Super glad to be here.
Oh, thank you. I definitely appreciate it. Why don't you introduce yourself for the listeners? Anyone who doesn't know who you are.
Yeah, most people don't know who I am. Unless my mom is listening, and then I've got one. Now, my name is Walker Neer, and I am a podcaster. I host the Walk Show podcast, which explores the walk of life. I host the Pick Up Your Sticks podcast, which is a video game podcast where we talk about why gaming matters. And then I also host the Crowfall podcast, which is about one video game specifically called Crowfall. So kind of nerdy, but the Walk Show is not nerdy. So
we love nerdy. We love everything.
Hey, me too.
So this is like we're flipping the script a little bit. What got you into podcasting? Like, how did that journey start for you?
Yeah. So there's pictures of me when I'm 2 years old, standing on the table at Thanksgiving dinner, telling stories, presumably, except I was 2. So they probably weren't very good stories. But I've just always been that kind of person, just someone who really just likes to talk. And I've come to understand in recent years that, and I think I am definitely in this camp, but at least some people, and again, certainly me, kind of think by talking, like expressing the thoughts kind of helps me work through those thoughts. So I think that's probably another part of the reason why I like it so much. But anyway, I did stand-up comedy when I was 20 for a period of time. Yeah. And then went away from it, and then actually went back when I was 30 and tried it again, and thought when I was 30 it was going to be this like movie scene where I like got on stage, and then I was like, oh, this is my calling. Like, why did I leave this? And that wasn't really the experience I had with it. It turns out that to do comedy, you have to go to a lot of open mics, which means you have to hang out in a lot of bars. And when I was 20, that was ideal. And when I was 30, I didn't really care as much about doing that. So anyway, so then fast forward a few years, and yeah, a good friend of mine was very flattering to me, and I'm easily won over by flattery, it turns out. And she said, you should start a podcast. And I said, yeah, but I don't know any celebrities and I'm not an expert on anything. So what would it be about? And she said, it doesn't really matter because you have this vulnerability, which really I think is just because I kind of stream of consciousness talk a lot. But she's like, you have this vulnerability when you explain how you arrive at conclusions or how you think about things. That's not even like a skill. It's just something that comes naturally to you, and other people it doesn't. So I think whatever you talk about, it would be engaging. And she was like, and besides, it's just the most you thing that you could do. So just go do it. And I was like, yeah, all right. And so I kind of had it in the back of my mind. And then I work as a project manager as my day job. And so, in the corporate wheelhouse, if you will. And one day got really frustrated with something that happened there, and decided that I needed to put my energy into something that I had control over. And even if it fails, at least it failed because of decisions I made, which for anyone that works in the corporate world, that's not usually how that goes, unless you're at the very top. And even then, I don't know that you actually really make all the decisions. So, so I just kind of started the Walk Show, and a very vain name since my name is Walker, and didn't really know what I was going to do. Kind of just started. I mean, I have early episodes are like, one of them is it's called passive aggressive mowing. And I'm talking about my neighbor's mowing schedule and how I feel like they're trying to like put me out with how often they mow, and really ridiculous. And then eventually I started getting interviews, and for the last couple years, it's pretty consistently been similar to the episode that I had with you that I mentioned earlier, where I just invite guests on from different walks of life and just kind of pick their brain and talk to them a bit. It's been awesome. Anyway, there's your 30-minute answer to your 10-second question.
No, we love long answers on the show. That's what we're here for. I was
Awesome.
gonna ask, so you've done a ton of episodes on your Walk Show podcast.
Yeah.
A lot, like not a little bit by any means. What have you learned through your time as a podcaster, as a host? Like what are the kind of things that you can share?
Yeah. There's a ton of stuff that I could point to, whether it be, individual lessons like based on the subject matter that the person's talking about, or just kind of broader things that I think are true about podcasting now that I've done it. Because I've done 150 episodes of the Walk Show in the last 3 years, but then with the other 2 shows that I have combined, I've done 300 episodes. So it's basically 2 episodes a week for 3 years straight. And I don't mean that to sound self-congratulatory as much as just like I have definitely, been invested in it, especially since it doesn't pay me. But I just really enjoy it. I've had a lot of life coaches, a lot of psychologists, that kind of people in that kind of space. And honestly, I've had a lot of authors, which is how I originally connected with you. Although we talked about your book, but that wasn't, I wouldn't say, the primary emphasis of our episode.
Definitely not.
I probably hoodwinked you a little bit on that, but you have a great website. And I was like, well, this is too interesting to just ignore. But anyway, so I think that, it can feel as the host, because I interview authors just like yourself. I don't have the time to read everyone's book unless I was only going to read in all of my free time. And I'm not. So the interviews can feel to me as the interviewer like it's going to be routine, because I end up asking a lot of similar questions, because I have to ask somewhat more general questions. Because again, I can't talk to you about the nitty gritty details of what happened on page 75, because I don't know. And also, though, I don't actually think that that's the best podcast, because the truth is that a show like mine that's relatively small in reach and audience, anyone that's coming on my show, like, I'm not getting the same guest that Joe Rogan's getting, right? So really, when I have someone on, like, they may be there to talk about their book, but most people in the audience don't know who they are or what book they have either. So I don't know that a nuanced conversation about the book would be that interesting, but your story or the guest story and who they are and how they think about the world, that's interesting. But anyway, so all of that to say, I guess I think that, and this will sound so cheesy, but I think during the pandemic, it was especially obvious to me, or was revealed. And again, it's something that people say a lot, but it really is true. And that's the sentiment that, especially in the pandemic, I mean, prior to the pandemic, obviously there was a lot of division in the United States, but in the pandemic, and then George Floyd happened and all this, and there's an enormous amount of division. And I'm not above that. I have my own opinions and, whatever. I think, I have my own worldview, but in meeting people, not just from around the country, but frankly, from around the world. I mean, I've interviewed people from all the continents and everything. I guess not Antarctica, I don't think, but
they got bad Wi-Fi over there.
Yeah, exactly. Hard to do Zoom. It really is true that we have so much more in common than we have that's different. And that sounds cheesy, because it's like, well, yeah, that's easy to say, but is that really true? Because I think these nuanced things about this, or I think really deeply about this topic, and other people don't even know about it. So how could we be similar? And while that's true, like the reason that we're all similar is because in the end, we all really just want the same basic things, which is like, we want to love and be loved. We want to be accepted. We want to be heard. We care about largely the same things. We care about people in our lives that mean a lot to us. We want to be able to provide at least a stable life for people. I mean, obviously not everyone can be, extremely wealthy or have the time available to them they want, because maybe they have to work a lot, or they have to work and go to school, and whatever that may be. But it's like, in the end, like, we really do all just kind of want the same things. And so I've gotten to talk to people that, my show's not a political show or something, so it's not like I'm arguing with people about politics, but like, I had one lady who's a ghost hunter. I personally do not believe in supernatural stuff. I've never had an experience with it that would lead me to that, nor have I ever seen anything that makes me believe in it. So when she asked me to be on the show, I was a little hesitant, but I went ahead and booked her. And then we get on, and it turns out she's got a PhD, not in ghost hunting, like in a real degree.
Yeah.
And the people that she ghost hunt with also all have master's degrees. And not that you have to have a college degree to be credible, but they're not just making stuff up. Like, they have this really academic approach to it. And walking away from that interview with her, I still don't believe in ghosts, but I don't think that what she does is funny anymore. Right? Like, it's credible. Like, it deserves respect, because she's not actually trying to prove that ghosts exist. She's really trying to say, hey, someone doesn't know how to describe paranormal activity. It's not normal activity. So then her and her group go in and they try and describe the activity. They try and find out the tangible, real reason that activity is happening. And if they can't, they don't conclude there's a ghost. They just conclude they don't know how to explain it. So a very long-winded way of saying, yeah, it's just shown me that people are not as different as the internet might make us think that they are.
No, I think that's awesome. That's a good point, because it's so interesting. The more people you talk to, and the more people from different places, I think one of the cool parts about podcasting is that you can connect with somebody from across the country, right? Yeah. Or across the world. And they do bring their own life experience to the platform and to the conversation. And you really get a sense for how small your own world really can be. Like, I don't even understand, like, before I started podcasting a couple of years ago, I don't even understand how I really had a concept for really the dynamics that are in the world as a whole, because there's so many things outside of small town Connecticut that I live in. It's like, there's so many different thought processes. There's so many different ways of looking at things. And to your point, so many people have the same value system, right? Like, the things that really matter, the core things that make us people and make us connect, those things are the same almost everywhere you look. When I ask people about, like, I'll ask authors and creative people, like, what makes them want to do what they're doing? Like, what keeps them passionate? And a lot of them just say, like, it's just a place it's just an outlet, or I can connect with people, or I didn't think what I was doing was important, but someone else found value in it. And that kind of gave me the feeling like I should keep doing this. And a lot of people aren't making money from the thing they're doing, but they're enjoying it so much. And then you start to think, like, maybe that's what life really is. Like, all these people that are happy doing the thing that they enjoy, regardless of how much money they're making from it. But when you only see people around you, you don't necessarily have those conversations or those dialogues. But when you hear it 30, 40, 50 times, and you hundreds of times, it's like, wow, maybe we are more alike than we are different.
Yeah, no, it's exceptionally true. And I mean, I'm from small town Missouri. I'm from the Midwest, in the heart of the Bible Belt, and I've seen the ocean once. I've never been out of the country. Like, I'm like the stereotype of the, like, Midwestern guy from any town, Nowhereville, USA kind of thing. And so, yeah, to get to talk to, I've talked to people in China and India, and just a week ago, I interviewed, the episode's not out yet, but I interviewed a guy who was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. His family moved to Uganda. I hope I'm not mistaking that. And then for high school, he moves to South Africa. Then he goes to LA, or to Southern California, for college, and now has moved back to Africa. He's a professional chess player. He speaks 8 languages, and he's a life coach.
Oh my gosh.
What? Like, that's insane. And here I am, though, like, I get to have a conversation with this guy, and I don't deserve to be in the room. You know what I mean? Like, but because of podcasting, I get to. I did a podcast with a Stanford professor who had written a book she's actually written many books. Most of them were academic, but she'd written a fiction book. And so we were on to talk about that. And we had this great dialogue and like this really great kind of chemistry, you know, in the conversation. And it's like, I didn't even finish community college. Like, when do I get to talk to a Stanford professor? Like, never is the answer. And here I got to, and not only got to, but like really got to connect. And like, we're friends on Facebook now. And I mean, I'm not going to her house for Thanksgiving or something, but yeah, just really humbling. And it really did make me feel, it made the world feel a lot more connected to me, because yeah, out here in Missouri, I'm I got it's just me and mine, you know?
Yeah. And I think for anyone listening too, it's like, we're not saying start a podcast if that's not your thing, but it is important to like kind of reach outside of just you. And that's what I've learned more as an author. I had this one vision, right? That one was painted from the internet, because that's all I had. Painted from YouTube specifically, of how writing was supposed to be when I first started out. And I was getting all these tips and whatnot. And then I started interviewing people and started talking to people from all over. And I just remember so many people giving me vastly different advice, vastly different tips. And the one thing that has been consistent across everyone is that you'll find your way, and your way will work for you. And it doesn't matter how everyone else does it. And one thing I didn't see online was like, you're gonna find your way, you're gonna find what works.
Right.
There's not a 10-step list of how this actually goes. And when you start to realize that, you're like, wow, life, for as many shared experiences as there were, there's still not a standard. And everyone I listen to says the same thing. There's not just one standard. There's not one way to make it work and one thing that works.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I think that's one of the things that like I wish I was more successful as a podcaster, which maybe the fact that I'm not speaks to that I don't know what I'm talking about. But I think that like, so when I first started, I went to Podfest is what it's called. It's a podcast conference in Florida that's an annual thing. 2,000 people, all podcasters are there. And it's just an industry podcast. So you meet and greet other podcasters. You get to see new, you know, services and products that are tailored to podcasting. And then beyond that, that's a lot of learning, right? And when I went the first time, I had 5 episodes under my belt. So I don't know anything. Like, I didn't even know that you would have a business card for a podcast, which makes sense now and seems obvious. But at the time, I didn't know. So I show up and they're like, yeah, we're going to have this business card swap, like it kind of like a speed dating idea, except for swapping business cards. So I went down to the Walgreens on the corner and bought index cards and like hand wrote out like 50 or 100 business cards, you know, because I didn't have anything to trade. And anyway, I share that just to explain like how much of a novice I am. But you get there, and when you talk to people in podcasting specifically, which speaks to what you're talking about with writing, it's like you will encounter all of these people that will tell you like, these are the rules of how it works. Like, you have to have this kind of microphone, and you have to have this kind of blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I mean, I'm not indicating that you don't need to care about any of those things. But I've heard ESPN puts out podcasts. It's not that this every week, but there's like a basketball podcast I listen to on ESPN. And I've heard it before where it sounds like they're recording it in like an echoey closet. Like, it's horrible. Like, there's just an echo the whole episode, and that's ESPN. And guess what? That show, that even that episode, I guarantee you, slaughtered me as far as listen count, right? Like, they got tons of listens. So my point is that like, good equipment is fine, but good equipment does not make a good podcast, right? And a good process doesn't make a good podcast. Now, a good idea doesn't either. So just like everything, there's a mix of it. There's nuance to it, but I feel like it's intimidating for people to start some of these things, because you go look and there's all these rules and you got to have this and this and that. And it's like, you don't really have to have any of that. I saw a thing with the Rick and Morty creators the other day. It was just a little snippet. And he said that the Dan Harmon, I think his name is, he said, people always want to show that they can be a good writer. And he's like, show that you can be a bad writer first, right? Like, that's step one, is that like, you suck at it, but you do it, and then you can get good. but you don't start anything and you're just good at it. And yeah, I think that's true for podcasting, writing, probably any creative outlet. People will give you all these rules, but it's hogwash. It's not true. You can do it without that.
Yeah, what's so cool about what you just said. I was talking to a podcaster a few weeks ago, a really close friend of mine actually, and she told me how she podcasts at work sometimes on her phone. Like she'll literally record the whole episode on her phone and just upload it fresh, no edits, no nothing.
Right.
And I was like, how do you do that? And she was like, I just do. Like I have the one intro beep that goes in and then I just start. And it's hilarious because her podcast is super successful. Like it's wild successful. Like she's posted her listens one time and I was like, how? I'm like, I'm producing way too much. So then so that it literally changed my process. I was like, why am I overly producing like this whole thing when you're literally just clicking the button? I'm like, I'm taking all this time. But then it made me but then I was like, I'm not her though. I have to do my thing. I have to do it my way. So I was like, I do have to produce a little bit more. I do want to add a couple things in here because she doesn't have a few things that I would like. And I remember just thinking like, this is how creatives go. This is what creatives go through, right? You compare yourself to everybody. You compare yourself to other people. I was going to ask, like, because you've been doing it so long, do you ever get stuck in that place of comparing yourself to others that are doing podcasts? Like you have 3 podcasts, you have 3 shows. How often do you find yourself comparing yourself to others?
That was probably a lot more prevalent in the first year, when it was all still a lot newer. And I thought that like, if I build it, they will come, like, hey, I've got a pod. So it's just a little bit before the checks start coming in. Like, that's not true. But I found that despite not monetizing it, like I was describing earlier, like I just loved it. Because I really hit my stride with it. I mean, my second year is starts at the very beginning of 2020. So it starts right before the pandemic. So for me, like it was a huge outlet during the pandemic to still get to talk to all these different people. But anyway, so no, I don't think I really compare myself too much anymore. I think I understand. Well, again, I think I understand it and yet don't have a successful show by the, a listener count number. So maybe I don't understand it, but from what I understand, marketing a show, I mean, certainly there's creating ads and promoting it and making people aware of it in that way. But there's also an element of like my show, The Walk Show, is so varied. I mean, you're on one week, but I've got other episodes where I interviewed these 2 sisters who run a perfume company. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing you could do. I don't know. And I think they're both fascinating conversations and great episodes. And I don't mean that in a braggy way or something, but just they're great guests. Yourself, those ladies, but they're totally different, right? They're not the same at all. So it can be hard to recommend because maybe you like the episode where I talk to an author or 2, but if you're wanting to hear author interviews, then maybe you don't care about the episode where I talk about my neighbor's mowing practices, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of betting on the audience liking me, and that takes a really long time to build, especially if you don't have a big media platform, And so I think that there's a lot in making a podcast that can be widely consumed. If you're not already a name that's recognizable, I think that having a really nuanced show helps, because a really nuanced show can help you break out of the obscurity, because now people don't really have to know about you or your guest because the topic is what they're interested in. And so they'll go for the topic kind of no matter what, which is why I started that third show that's just about one video game. Because it's like, if you like that game,
this is the show
then
for
you might be into it and you don't have to know anything else. And I don't have to wonder, is this episode going to appeal to the same demographic that the last episode did? Because it's all the same. Turns out that game failed pretty hard. So I'm going to have to take another swing, but it gets comparable listens to what my other shows do. And we do no marketing. I mean, we post on Twitter once a week when the episode comes out, and that's it. And it's doing as well as the other shows, which is again, not impressive, but it just kind of, I think, proves out that it's like the more nuanced you are, the better it is for growing an audience. So the reason I say all that is to say, because I have that understanding, I'm not really worried about where I'm at, because I don't think it's a reflection of me or my guests or anything like that. It's more like there's, a million podcasts out there. How are you going to be the one that they listen to? Well, probably not with a variety show that's about everything, right?
Yeah, you actually made two really, really strong points. Like one being the nuance, right? If you come up with a show that has this nuanced concept, you become, I think, for example, I was listening at one point, the show Invincible was out, right? Like last year or year before. So I'm over here. I love podcasts, and I'm loving Invincible. Watching I want to listen to a review in the car going to work. So what do? Go to Spotify. I type in Invincible podcast, and there was like one or two, right, that you were picking it up and that were really doing Invincible podcast reviews. I clicked through a couple, find the one that has the better production because I really care about the sound quality. And then these people would just they would just talk about every episode. And I remember it was called the Invincible podcast. And I was just like, whoa, this is literally hitting the spot right now.
Right.
And I remember when the show came out, because they actually had the podcast before the show came out.
Oh,
so they had been doing it for so long, like because they had done it for the comics and all this other stuff. Then when the show came out, they were like saying week to week, like, hey, like our listens are crazy right now because people are listening for Invincible. And it was so funny to like think, because who was looking for Invincible? Like, you're looking for a very specific topic. So then all of a sudden this podcast fills that gap. And then anytime I want to go listen to Invincible and like learn more about what's going on or get some ideas, I like go to that podcast and I still listen, which it's been a couple of years since even the next season's planning on coming out, but the next season's going to come out soon. And I'm going to be right back in that podcast.
Right. Yeah.
It is crazy because it's such a nuanced idea. So I think touching on that, like, if you are nuanced, you do have an opportunity there to build an audience. But then the second piece, people coming for you, right? Like people getting invested in you as the host and a variety show where you're interviewing, talking to people. I think it also goes a long way because it might be harder to build because you have to really get invested. But once people are invested, they're gonna just keep coming. Like that's just how it works. People just like, I have people now who literally listen to the show. Mostly because they know we're going to get a pretty good interview. We're always going to have a fun conversation and whatnot. And I think that goes a long way too. So it's like, there's that balance as a creator of making sure you do what you want to do, which I think you're definitely doing. Like you're doing all the things you want to do. I think that's important too, because when you start comparing yourself, you almost forget that. And I think you've grown past that piece, but there's a lot of people who get stuck there. And I was in that piece for a little bit. I think a couple years ago when I first started, I was definitely like, I want to be Joe Rogan. How do I become Joe Rogan? And then I was like, I'm not Joe Rogan. And now nobody wants to be Joe Rogan. But like,
that's true.
But it's just crazy because one of my podcast idols is Bill Simmons, right? I listen to Bill Simmons podcast.
Thank you.
Religiously. And he has
I was listening to it right before we started recording.
Perfect pod. He has a perfect style, right? He does all of his sports stuff up front for the people who really want to listen to the sports stuff. But then he has all these other segments that get thrown in mid show and then late show that are like his thing, whatever thing he wants to talk about for the day. He's interviewed he interviews his daughter sometimes. Like she'll be on the podcast, but she's always in the second half because she's not going to talk sports, and people are going to come for the sports in the beginning and then stick around for all of the super hyper interesting stuff that he talks about after. I love his podcast.
I love that you brought it up. It's funny because he's obviously wildly popular. I never meet anyone that even knows who he is. I'm like, Bill Simmons, and like, man, like he used to be on ESPN, like he's a writer for a long time. Like, nah, never heard of him. How is this true? Wild. He's excellent. Ryan Russillo on his network also. So here's where I'm a psychopath. I played sports and stuff in high school, which is 20 years ago now. So my point in mentioning that is just simply that, like, I do have an affinity for sports. I listen to every episode of the Bill Simmons podcast, 3 episodes a week. I listen to Ryan Russillo, which is another Ringer podcast. I listen to Zach Lowe's NBA podcast from ESPN, The Low Post. I I maybe watch one NBA regular season game a year, maybe. I'll watch the playoffs and I'll watch like the finals, when the stakes are higher, but I can tell you about different teams right now, never seen them play. You know what I mean? Like never sat and watched a game. But it's because I'm really just a fan of interviews. I mean, I didn't mention this before when you'd asked about me starting the pod, but I realized well before I started podcasting that I kind of have and I say it's weird just because none of my friends are into it. It's probably more popular than I would think, but I just really like interviews. Like I can just go to YouTube and I'll go pull up Malcolm Gladwell interviews. I can watch Malcolm Gladwell conversations all day long, every day, doesn't matter. I mean, someone asked me recently, they were like, so if you could be watching any TV show, like it's Sunday, you don't have anything to do, you could watch any show, you get to pick, what would it be? Like, would it be like football or what would you watch? And I was like, honestly, I'd probably pull up YouTube and click a Malcolm Gladwell interview. And they were like, that's really weird. And I was like, I just really enjoy good interviews. So I'm just kind of a fan of this whole space anyway. And yeah, I think Bill Simmons is excellent at it. And I think I like him as an interviewer and as a podcaster. I think that's what draws me more than sports. Like sports is the context. Like I probably wouldn't listen if he did a show about something I have no, like if it was about horseback, like horse racing or something, I don't know if I would listen because I don't know anything about it. Right. But you can talk about the NBA. Like, yeah, I know that. That's fine.
Yeah. His podcast always like one, you can just tell he's a professional. You can tell he understands the space and how to really put on a good interview, which is talent in itself, and it takes time and energy to learn. But one of the things I really enjoy about his podcast, especially, is the way that he can bring on, like he'll bring on an expert. I think he brought on someone that does like trading cards. Like the sport card episode, and he had all these trading cards and talked about how the value of them. By the end of the episode, I felt like I knew the market. I was right. And I was like, that's how you know he did a good job, because he had me feeling like I could go out and go find myself a LeBron James rookie card and make some money real quick and know about the mint levels and all this other stuff. So I think that sometimes having fun with it, because I'm also one of those people. I watch YouTube all day watching the live interviews, two people on a screen, literally talking back and forth. I think that's some of the most fun stuff that's some of the best content to me, because you're really getting a true indication about somebody. It's long form. I love long interviews where you're really getting someone's entire life kind of broken down. I think I think podcasting is an amazing space. And I think another piece that has really, in my opinion, making podcasts taken off, like help take it off, is the pandemic. The fact that without social interactions, without being able to see people as often or nearly being able to sit down as long, a lot of people long for that connection, long to see and hear stories of others and see what they're doing and be inspired. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there, just to get yourself in that space. And for my listeners, for anyone listening, definitely listen to go watch someone's podcast, go listen to someone's podcast where they're interviewing, because it just gives you such a better insight of other individuals. You take some time, you get to know somebody you really never have met, and it helps you rewire your brain to kind of accept that you're not the only person out here.
Yeah, well, and it can be a great way to find new stuff. Like, for example, like I mentioned, Malcolm Gladwell, author, for anyone that's not familiar with him. So I like his books, but I found an interview where he's interviewing this guy named David Epstein, who wrote this book called Range. And I had never heard of David Epstein. I'd never heard of Range. I mean, it was a relatively new book when I watched this interview. But after watching an hour-long conversation between those two about that book, I was super interested in that book and went and bought it and read it. And it's one of the most fascinating things I've read in years. You know what I mean? And it's like, I would have never found that if I wouldn't have watched that interview, because when I would have come across it, So, there's a lot to be gleaned from that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your other podcast, Not the Walk Show.
Okay.
Because we have some episodes. Definitely take a listen to the episode that I'm on. Just gonna plug that. I think a lot of people in my circle have listened to it and have loved it. So like when I say people have loved it, there's a lot of people who have been like, hey, like that was a really good interview. And I was like, gosh, like for my supervisor to say it, I was like, this is a little aggressive. Like you got to actually listen over here because he would DM me and was like, this was a good interview.
Cool, man. That's awesome. Well, that's good.
I was honestly, it's the host. It's definitely not me.
No, I was just going to say it's the guest that carries it. So it's on you.
What have you been doing with your other podcasts? One's about gaming. Talk about those a little bit more.
Yeah. So Pick Up Your Sticks is another one that I started about 6 months after I started the Walk Show. Pick Up Your Sticks is actually a reference to Chappelle Show, my favorite skit show of all time. Dave Chappelle is my favorite comedian of all time. But there's a skit where he's at like the Make-A-Wish Foundation and he's playing PlayStation against a sick child, for the Make-A-Wish thing or whatever. And he yells at the kid, pick up your sticks. And so that's what the name is a reference to, if anyone thinks it sounds like a strange name. And so my friend and I are both avid gamers. I've been an avid gamer my whole life. And we both grew up with it. Me and my co-host, Brett is his name. We both grew up with gaming. And what I mean by that is like our dads were both gamers. So, I mean, my dad got a Nintendo when I was 5 years old, right? And then I grew up playing video games on my own and with my dad, throughout my childhood. And my friend Brett had a similar kind of upbringing. And so we were talking about, we still are avid gamers. We'd like to start a podcast together. At that point, I kind of had an idea that the anything goes variety show is kind of hard to market. So I was like, well, I don't want to stop doing it because it's too fun, but I don't know that it'll ever do anything. So let's make one about video games. Turns out that's actually not very nuanced either. It's more nuanced than everything, but there's a huge umbrella of content and ideas under video games. So we were trying to talk about, well, what would we want the show to be? And we weren't really interested in doing a review show because then you've always got to be playing the latest game, even if you're not interested in it. And neither of us really wanted to go down that road. And we didn't really want to just try and do news because we didn't want to have to try and chase around social media stories constantly, basically.
Yeah. Every day.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, well, why do we like it? And it's for us, it's that video games, for a lot of people, and this is changing certainly in the last 10 years, this has changed a lot, but there's still a segment of people that look at video games as a toy. It's something that children do. And if adults do it, it's basically adults playing with toys, which happens, but so like you might meet someone and be like, hey, do you like games? You'd be like, nah, it's not for me. And that's acceptable. But if you were to go up to someone and be like, hey, do you like movies? And they're like, no, I don't like any film. You'd be like, really? Like, there's got to be something that you like out there, Or like, do you read? Like, no, there's no book I've ever liked. Like, I feel like you just not read enough books then, because there's one, I'm sure. Video games are the same thing. They're in that same category of like, and certainly, 30 years ago, they were not in that category. They were more like toys. But by now in 2022, like it's not often, but I've cried at video games. I've laughed at video games. This is a really silly game, but there's a game out right now called Rocket League. It's been out for several years, but it's this competitive soccer car game that you're familiar with. And it sounds like the matches are 5 minutes. You experience the entire range of human emotion in that 5 minutes: shame, regret, hope, fear, all of it, like love, everything. And it's just this stupid little thing, but it's like, so gaming really does matter. Like it's a bigger deal than just a toy. Now, I also don't mean to imply that the solution to the world's problems are in video games or something like that, but it deserves to be looked at in the same way that other forms of at least entertainment media do. And so we were trying to come up with a tagline for the show, and everything sounded super pretentious. And finally, we just kind of like, why isn't it just why gaming matters? Because that's really what we're trying to talk about. Like all these different sentences we're coming up with that are the tagline, really that's all what they say. And so we talk about a wide variety of games. Our most common episode type is just what's got you picking up your sticks this week. And we just talk about what we're playing, and that might be one game, that might be 5 games, I mean, whatever that is. We've also interviewed a lot of people in the esports scene. We're both pretty big StarCraft 2 fans, and we've interviewed a lot of StarCraft 2 pro players. This might be way too in the weeds, but whatever. StarCraft 2 is really popular in Korea. There is a tournament there that is considered the most prestigious of all professional StarCraft 2, called the GSL, the Global Star League, even though it's actually only in Korea, not very global. But the best of the best play there. Well, they have a English-speaking broadcast team that's 2 Americans that moved over to South Korea in like 2008 when StarCraft 2 was first getting ready to come out. And they have been the English-speaking broadcast for this Korean tournament for that long. They're probably the most famous commentating duo in all of esports, not just StarCraft. And yeah, we got to interview one of those 2 commentators. His name's Artosis. And that's his, stage name, screen name, or whatever. But I mean, super, super fascinating. We interviewed a game developer, and I asked him, I've talked to writers and musicians and stuff on my other show, and so I kind of have some insight into the creative process. But how do you create a video game? Like, how do you, and not like technically, but how do you come up with the idea? Like, what inspires you? And he was like, I like to look at algorithms that produce interesting patterns, and then I try and create something based on that pattern from the algorithm. Well, that's mind-blowing. I had no idea that anyone would ever give that answer. You know what I mean? Like, it's so far beyond my comprehension. So even though it's totally different from the Walk Show, a lot of those interviews really, really fascinating to get insights. I mean, we talked to one guy who, I'm going to get the country wrong now. It's somewhere in Eastern Europe, whatever. Somewhere in Eastern Europe he's from. And in 2010, he moves to LA to become a professional StarCraft 2 player, and he's 18 years old. And in 2010, esports is not what esports is today.
Yeah, definitely.
There was no Twitch, right? YouTube existed, but not like it does now. So to say that you're going to be a professional gamer in 2010 is probably laughable to most people. And to move across the world to do it with no one is nuts. And here he is still around. So yeah, pick up your sticks. It's still a lot of variety, it turns out, but all centered around gaming. And we try and always, at some point in the episode, ask the question, why does this matter? Right. And then talk about that emotional connection. And we've asked almost every guest we had, why does gaming matter? And there's a lot of answers, but the most common answer is what we've been talking about. It's connection. It's a social opportunity. It's a way to bond with people, whether that be playing on the couch with someone or playing on the internet with people or whatever that is. It's a social thing. So it does matter.
Yeah. Gaming is awesome to me. Like, it's it's an area where I spend a ton of time. I remember I was one of my favorite games to play right now is No Man's Sky.
Yep.
And No Man's Sky, for anyone that doesn't know, was a flop upon release, to say the least. But the developers have done so much to grow the game and to right their wrong. And now it's like a beacon of light. If you really go in and play it, it's beyond just it's beyond whatever people assumed it could be. Like, it is insane. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, I've invested tons of hours in it. And I think sometimes it's the right type of player, the right type of game, but it's deep. And for me, it's something that I never even thought I would enjoy a story or telling your own story the whole time as you're exploring a vast world, trying to figure out what the heck is going on.
Yeah. No Man's Sky is incredible. And it's a rare example where a game came out behind a ton of, they had marketing on like the Today Show for No Man's Sky because the technology behind it was pretty fascinating. And so somehow that caught the interest of people outside of gaming. Even I had non-gamer friends asking me about No Man's Sky before it came out. Like, oh, are you going to play that when it comes out? And it's like, how do you even know about it? But it was just this hype train. And then, yeah, to your point, it did not meet expectations at all. But the developer just kind of put their head down, and not only have they fixed it, but they fixed it for free. All of these massive content updates they've come out with None of them are expansions or DLC, just a patch. That's kind of unheard of in the modern gaming space. Like, there might be a game that's bad and maybe it gets fixed, but if they're going to add large chunks of new content, you're going to pay for that.
They added an entire story. They added the story mode after the release.
You can grow your own spaceship in that game. It's nuts. Like, it is bonkers what that game does. You're right. It is surpassed any expectation anyone could have had. And yeah, is a great example. And this is going to sound so corny, and I just thought of it, so it might not hold water. Feel free to poke holes, but I think to some extent, actually, it's maybe a good analogy for where we are in society right now, where they released this game and the amount of internet hate. I mean, I don't think they got attacked or anything personally, but the amount of internet hate they got was tremendous. Review bombed. Everyone hated them. And now we fast forward 5 years. It can't not be a story of redemption. You know, like, you can't still be mad at them about that, because they have gone way above and beyond to make amends. And to be clear, I don't mean that like every wrong is just okay with an apology or with some, elbow grease or something. But certainly there are circumstances where someone messes up, and maybe after time, like, it can be okay again and they can redeem themselves, And I think that we're in a space, and I don't, across all ideologies, unfortunately, where if you say something that doesn't agree with X person's ideology, they might write you off for a long time. And again, that's not specific to any one group or anything, but I don't think that's good or not even ethically good. Like, it's just not the most enriching way to live. Like, how disappointing would it be if you never played No Man's Sky because of everyone's anger in 2016? You'd have missed out on however many dozens of hours or more of experience that you've had with it, right? Like, anyway, so I again, that's a little corny, and I'll admit that, but I think there's some truth to that.
I do too, because just to your point, there were so many people. Like, when I got my PS5 this past like couple months ago, and I was like, wow, what am I going to download? What am I going to play? And I looked at No Man's Sky, and I was like, I remember people saying this game sucks. But then I'm also one of those people that if it's been some time, I know developers, especially I feel like developers today are a lot better at going back into their game, trying to fix it, trying to make it better, and delivering the product that they promised, because they do sometimes have the resources to. And I looked it up, and a lot of people just kept saying this game is beyond where it was. Give this a try. It made every give this a try list. So then I did, and I was like, wow, if I had never played No Man's Sky, I don't even just the sheer volume of what you could do, it surprised me in every sense of the word. I just never thought there would be a game like it. And I think it's a testament to just what you can do. Because I was going to actually ask about Cyberpunk 2077 and how that game I feel like it had the weight of the world on its shoulders. It was going to fail by the internet standards, just because the standard was so ridiculous for it, and how they're still trying to CD Projekt Red still trying to recover from that. And they were beloved before, and now they're the butt of jokes. And I think that's such an interesting contrast when you really see how much effort and energy it takes in general to make these kind of games.
Well, and it also, and again, not specific to any one topic or any one group or anything like that. The internet rage is always so ridiculous, because to argue that CD Projekt Red is anti-gamer because Cyberpunk didn't live up to standards is nuts, because you know what else CD Projekt Red owns? Good Old Games, which sells all of their games DRM free. And according to the same people who think that all gaming companies are evil, DRM is one of the root evils, right? It's this thing where you don't get to really control or own what you paid for. Well, their whole marketplace is built on the idea of not having DRM in their games. So my point being, you almost couldn't have a more pro gamer company behind Cyberpunk. So again, it's fine to not like the game, and it's fine to criticize it. It's fine to say this isn't good, but to act like they're the new, evil EA, or something on the scene. It's like, they're not that at all. They couldn't be farther from that. And yeah, I didn't have a machine that I could play Cyberpunk on when it dropped. I do have it now, but I haven't been in a spot where I thought I could give it the time. So I've dabbled in it for a couple hours just to see it, and then I've been waiting until I'm ready to just sit and go through it, because I feel like it deserves an actual, complete go through.
Real playthrough.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's certain things like that, and I don't want to talk too much about gaming, but
no, wrong guy. But 3 shows, 2 of them gaming. So
yeah, it's hard not to talk gaming when you talk to someone else. It's because it's such an interesting space. I had a friend that, I think the game's called Frostpunk. I'm pretty sure, and it is amazing. The story
so hard.
Deep. It's difficult. It is one of the most difficult games. I couldn't, for the longest time. For those who don't know, this game has you surviving. You're just a village of survivors, and you start off with a steam pump basically, and that's all you got. And it is difficult. It took me I think 3 hours to get past 12 days, like just regular survival, because we were just running out of everything, running out of coal, didn't have enough heat, people were dying, like it just the whole place was collapsing, and I still find myself struggling. I'm on day like 60 or something like that. I'm like, gosh, how do we keep going? I feel like I'm all the way built out. It's just crazy. But to me, like the mechanics, the detail, like the level of detail in that game is insane. And for people who don't really, like, to your point earlier, if you're thinking that it's not a form of art, like if you think these are your toys, just pick that up and just try to manage that game. Because I guarantee it's going to take you so much energy, so much calculation, so many calculations to say, you know what, we're going to place that here. Right now, we're going to send some scouts out. Scouts should bring back some food. We're going to take this. I'm micromanaging the hours to get this done. It's like, let's stop pretending that these things aren't full on art, because they are.
Yeah, well, and so to sit and watch a movie or listen to a song, I think is a pretty passive activity. You might be emotionally invested, and I don't mean that it doesn't have those hooks, obviously, but it's a pretty passive thing. You're just kind of watching what comes. I think reading is actually a little more interactive, not only because you're having to consume the words and process them, but like typically as the reader, you're creating some of the scenes in your own head, right? You're filling in some of the details that the writer didn't provide. So it's almost a little more of a back and forth between the reader and the writer, even though they're not there together. But yeah, with gaming, you get everything that a movie has: audio, video, full motion, all of that. And you get to interact and make choices in it. So how it's not beyond film in people's minds, I don't know, because it offers everything that film does and more, because you can choose and make choices. And yeah,
it's like Last of Us Part 2. It's a game like that. Like, that's not even a game. That's just a work of art. It's literally a movie, voice acting and story and all these elements coming into one. I remember, like, if you haven't played it, I'm sorry, but you should have played it a long time ago. They have the scene where Joel dies, and I lose my mind because it feels like, I remember I cried. I did cry.
Yeah.
I cry all the time during games, though, because sometimes they make you feel. And Joel dies, and I was broken up. I was brokenhearted, and it destroyed me. And I remember the internet, everyone said, oh, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And when it happened, it still crushed me. I was like, I could have seen it, known it, and then it hit me so hard. Once it finally was real, it's like, how do you not think that's art?
Yeah. I promise this will be my last example, unless you ask another gaming question. But like, for me, there's this game called Shadow of the Colossus. It's an old game, and it's been remastered now. And in it, there's no one else in the world, right? Like, you're this character, and you have a horse, and there's like a spiritual voice thing that kind of gives you some directions. But other than that, there's no one in the world for you to hang out with. There's not a town you go to. You don't have a family there. You're trying to resurrect your deceased girlfriend. And In the whole game, all you're doing is running around and fighting these enormous, land or skyscraper size boss type creatures. Well, towards the very end of the game, throughout the game, the only time your character really speaks is to call out your horse's name, because your horse is like your only friend, really. And the horse will come in and rescue you and, whatever. And towards the end of the game, there's a moment, again, spoiler alert, it's been 20 years, so tough. There's a part where the horse falls off a cliff, and at least at that moment, you think it's dead. It turns out it comes back, thank God. But in that moment, you think it's dead, and it broke me. And it's not a moment. It's not like the game tells you to care about the horse. The game doesn't give you some elaborate backstory about how you had the horse as a boy and blah, blah, blah. None of that. But it was just that through the interaction of like, I am on my own, and the game is hard. And it's like, I'm on my own and it's challenging. And the only person or entity that is ever there for me is my horse. And then it dies. It's like, no, like it's the only thing I had. Like, no. And all of that's from a game. And yeah, I cried certainly at that. And I don't know that it's not like the music scored up when that moment happens and you're supposed to cry, if you will. It felt very organic, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, how is that not art? Get out of here.
Yeah, it's just like, come on, y'all, stop fooling around.
Pick up your sticks, people.
Yeah, pick up your stick. I think being able to recognize passions is so important, and no matter where that is for whoever's listening, that can be that can be you. You can find something that you love, something you enjoy, and do it. It's always like the message I like to leave the podcast with, because for so many people, they don't pursue their passions. They don't make time for the things they love and enjoy. And then they feel empty because they're not finding space. To me, if you can find space for everything else in your life, all of the work shifts, all of the other stuff, then you can find time for your passion. You can find time for the thing you enjoy, even if it's once a week, hopping on a podcast and interviewing somebody, or if it's sitting down playing a video game and enjoying. One thing I do, I love playing franchise and Madden. I don't care how bad the game is. I'm going to have my team and we're going to go to the Super Bowl. And that's something that's important to me. So I make sure I try to find time. I try to support my team. My wife knows it. She'll hear me every now and then talking to them like, man, we gotta get a new quarterback. Just try to get in the draft. It means a lot. It means a lot every time. But you got to find what's important. You got to find what you care about. You got to find time to do the thing that fills you up. I wanted to ask you, leave people off. Where can they find you online? Where can they connect with you? Where can they listen to your podcast? Drop all the little links and all the whatnots.
Yeah. All three of the podcasts, the Walk Show, Pick Up Your Sticks, and the Crowfall podcast, all available on any podcast app. So whether it's Spotify, Google, Apple, wherever you listen, you can find any of the shows there. The only site that actually has the only show that has its own website is the Walk Show, and that is just the walkshowpodcast.com. But to be clear, it's literally just the podcast feed. So if that's the only way you can remember to find it, then you can go there. But otherwise, you're probably just going to listen to whatever app you do. If you don't mind, and I'm so sorry to hijack the end here, but I would like to add one thing to what you said there about passion and pursuing it, because I think you're absolutely right. There's a guy named Cal Newport. He has a book called Deep Work that's pretty famous. So this is his thought, not mine. I want to make that clear. But he talked about how, there's a lot of conversation about pursuing passion. And the reason I want to share this is because it resonated with me and was true for me, certainly. But the way that gets framed is that is like you already know what your passion is, or you sit on the couch and you identify a thing, and when it comes to you, you're like, oh, that's my passion. But for a lot of people, like they might not have that. And his point is that that's because that's not how passion works almost all of the time. The way it works is that you try something. If you like it, you continue doing it. If you continue doing it, you start to develop mastery over it. In that process, you might develop passion for it. And so the reason I think that that's important to say is because if someone listening doesn't feel like they know what their passion is, or doesn't feel like they have something that gets them up in the morning, because I was that way really until I started podcasting. I just try stuff. Like, I had never done podcasting before I tried it, right? Like, I'd never, and not just podcasting, but I'd never been on radio. I'd never broadcast. I mean, yeah, I did stand up, but that's totally different than podcasting is. And it wasn't until I just started doing it a lot that I actually found that, wow, I really do love this a lot. So basically, like, don't beat yourself up or shame yourself if you don't know what that is. Like, you're not different than anyone else. You just got to try stuff, but it's out there. And yeah, when you find it, what Jahmil said is 100% correct. You got to pursue it because it's worth it.
I love that. I love that so much because it is so real. You don't know. Like, I didn't know I enjoyed writing. I didn't start writing until 2 years ago, and then I started publishing and all this other stuff. I would have never considered that when I was 26. I would 25, 18. It just wasn't a part of the story. So it is really finding something you enjoy, gaining mastery over it, and then maybe you might like doing it more.
Yeah. Well, and it's not to diminish it. It's just that, like, it doesn't, you're not broken if you don't have some idea that just flashes in your head and you love all of a sudden. Like, it takes time to develop that. So just try stuff and you'll find something, and then it'll be totally worth it.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely leave on that note. Thank you so much for making time for coming on this podcast. This has been enlightening conversation.
Oh man, I can't thank you enough. I just love talking, obviously. So I can't thank you enough, man. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks. And for all the listeners, you already know what it is. Thank you for listening. Peace out. Catch you next time.
Scribble notes when I wrote these quotes. If I offend, pardon me, there's more of me to grow. Creative in my process, enjoy the show. The will is different when you recognize the different strokes. Different folks, same goals, we all want the most. So when we reach the top, we can enjoy the toast. The type of bread we get is fresh about the bakery. Told them don't play with me, with or without a degree. Don't question my intensity, bravery. Similar to agencies that want to see you fold. So just pray for me. Yeah, Einstein with my energy.